Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, Theresa May is meeting Caribbean leaders to try to reassure them that no one from the Windrush generation or their children will be deported over paperwork issues. She's also issued an apology after it emerged that some people who arrived from the Commonwealth decades ago as children were now being incorrectly identified as illegal immigrants. A new task force is being set up to help those affected. The row provoked some angry scenes in the Commons yesterday as the Home Secretary was forced to answer an urgent question on the issue.
Can she tell the House how many have been detained as prisoners in their own country? Can she tell the House how many have been denied health under the National Health Service? How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their job? This is a day of national shame, and it has come about because of a hostile environment policy that was begun under her Prime Minister.
I am concerned that the Home Office has become too concerned with policy and strategy and sometimes lose sight of the individual. And this is about individuals. And we have seen the individual stories. And they have been, some of them, terrible to hear. And that is why I have acted. I am not aware of any specific cases of a person being removed in these circumstances.
Well, that was Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, and those scenes from the House of Commons. So let's just take a look at the background to this story. Well, the name Windrush generation comes from a ship called the Empire Windrush, which brought people from the West Indies to the UK in 1948 to help rebuild Britain after the war. In 1971, the government passed a law giving all Commonwealth citizens indefinite leave to remain. However, no records were kept and no paperwork issued confirming this, making it hard for people to prove they're here legally. Then in 2012, when Home Secretary Theresa May announced an immigration crackdown, saying she wanted to create a really hostile environment for illegal immigrants, the law was changed so that if people didn't have the proper documentation, they wouldn't be able to work or gain access to housing and benefits, making it tough for the Windrush generation and their children to prove their status. Well, joining me here in the studio to discuss all this is Anthony Bryan, who was detained last year. And we're also joined by the crossbench peer and anti-racism campaigner Herman Ousley. And James Cleverly is the Conservative Party Deputy Chairman. Welcome to all of you. Anthony Bryan, first of all, you were detained and you were almost deported, and you've been in the UK since you were a child. How would you describe your experiences with the Home Office?
The Home Office didn't want to listen to me at all.
They didn't want to listen?
They didn't believe me. They thought I was lying. They even think I come in here under different passports at the late date. They just didn't believe me.
How did it feel when you have been here? This has been your home since you were about 8 years old.
Well, I felt angry because I'm telling them that I came on my brother's passport. First start, they didn't believe that. They're telling me that don't happen. Nobody travels on nobody's passport before, and that's how I came. I came on my brother's passport.
Did you have any papers or any
documents? I did have some paperwork after I came, but moving and it got lost. So I reported to the police station, got the crime note on that, showed all that to them. Nothing would help.
So you were detained?
Yeah, I was brought to the Verne, somewhere in Dulce or somewhere 160 miles from where I used to live.
And what was it like?
It was a nightmare, because I thought that was it. I thought after they bring me to this place here, the next place was Jamaica, because I was locked up. I couldn't come out. I only could speak to my missus. I phoned her, told her that they got a plane ticket for me. She didn't believe me. And
this was a plane ticket to send you to Jamaica?
Yeah.
And how were you kept off that plane?
You had to pay to cancel it. You had to pay to cancel that flight. Although I didn't book it, I have to pay to cancel it.
So you, in the end, had to actually put up the money to stop yourself being wrongly deported?
Yeah.
So you were detained for how long?
First time I was detained for 3 weeks, and the second time 2 weeks.
And when was all this?
Well, the last time was about a couple of months back. And before that, a couple of months before that. So every couple of months, that's why I was so nervous when I went to sign on. Because every time I go sign on, you don't know if you're coming back out.
So this has been going on, this sort of yo-yoing in and out of detention for 2.5 years, and the Home Office hasn't listened to anything you have to say about how you arrived at... I mean, did they explain why they were questioning your legal status?
No, they just said I'm illegal, and the Capita want me out. Well, Capita and immigration want me out of the country because I'm illegal. Because the immigration applied Capita to do all of that. To do the... Once Capita pick you up, that's it.
Has it been resolved now?
Well, I got word of mouth that my BMH card is at the office, but I have no evidence in my hand. I have not received nothing yet myself.
James Cleverly, do you want to apologise?
Yes, yes, without a shadow of a doubt. The Prime Minister has apologised already. She's meeting representatives of Caribbean governments. The situation whereby we wanted to make sure that immigration rules were enforced, I think is reasonable. They didn't envisage the unique set of circumstances for the children that came with the Windrush generation. That has caused a problem, and unfortunately it's a problem that Tony's had to live through, and I do apologise for that. And what we're now doing, what the government is now doing, is everything it can to resolve this quickly, at no cost to the individuals. I'm sorry to hear that again. Tony's had to pay money to
But what are you going to? Is the government going to compensate? Out of having to pay his own, put up the money to get him off a plane that was going to take him to Jamaica?
Well, look, we absolutely value the people that came with the Empire Windrush and the children. They rebuilt the country after the war. They've been a foundation stone of.
But you didn't, because you've detained people like Anthony. You've detained them repeatedly and treated them as illegal immigrants, despite having said that people of the Windrush generation were allowed to stay here indefinitely because of their role in rebuilding this country after the war.
And that was a problem, and it was an error. And we're now going to look to resolve it. And thankfully, it seems there are a very small number of cases, so we're able to deal with each one on an individual basis. So we will make this right.
Right. Are you reassured by what you've heard from James Cleverly?
Well, it's better than what we've had 24 hours ago, but it's still not, I think, satisfying a lot of people who continue to have concerns. See, the government... I asked the question in the House of Lords only 6 weeks ago, and it was answered to say no representations have previously been made to the government about the likely implications of what they were doing. The reality is Commonwealth, Caribbean countries' heads of government had made representation to the Foreign Office back in 2016 about this. So the experience that you have had over the last 2 years were already likely to occur because it was raised with government. And so the problems that have been experienced is that government will not listen, did not listen. And even yesterday morning, Number 10 was saying Prime Minister has no time in her diary to meet with the heads of Caribbean governments. They've been dragged along all the way to respond. And if there wasn't the Commonwealth heads of government happening, I'm certain that nothing would have happened. This would have gone underneath the radar. You would have been deported, as indeed others would, and may have done.
I mean, that
is a scandal.
That's shameful, isn't it, James Cleverly? And it's true, the government has been dragged kicking and screaming to this point.
Well, I think the Home Secretary yesterday, in her statement to the House, conceded that we could and should have dealt with this better, and she has taken the criticisms on board. The Prime Minister is now meeting with representatives from Caribbean countries. The Home Office has set up a task force to make sure that this situation can be resolved so that people like Tony can have that certainty and know that when we say that they are loved and valued and respected, that means something, because they will be all those things and protected by the system as well.
But isn't it the case, James Cleverly, you said it was a mistake, it was an error, but actually it was deliberate government policy by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary in 2012. In her own words, she wanted to make the UK a hostile environment for illegal immigrants. Was that not the reason that people like Anthony nearly ended up being deported?
Well, I think it is legitimate to say that when people have done the right thing and gone through the right process to work to come here, that we should look after them and protect them. But I think it's also legitimate to say that we shouldn't extend the same rights to illegal migrants. Now, the problem was people like Tony were wrongly defined as illegal immigrants. That was the problem.
Because of a deliberate government policy?
Yes.
No, the policy was about illegal immigrants. The error was how the Windrush generation would define. That was the error, and it's an error we are putting right. We are apologising for and putting right.
Right. Well, even if we accept what you've just said, why is it that Herman Ousley has set out very clearly that heads of Commonwealth countries back in 2016, responding to that government policy, that deliberate policy of making life hostile here for possible illegal immigrants.
Not possible. Only for illegal immigrants. The error was.
But we've just established they weren't illegal immigrants. That you didn't listen.
Well, I don't have details of those conversations, and the point that the Home Secretary made in the statement is, until very, very recently, situations, particularly about removals, about deportations, examples had not been brought to her attention. Now that examples of where people have lost out have been brought to our attention, she has moved very, very quickly to set up a cross-department working group to make sure that it is quick and easy and as complicated as possible for people to regularise their status, so they can know that they are absolutely secure in their status here as welcome parts of British society.
If the government had reacted quickly, they would have listened to the concerns raised by the Commonwealth heads. I interviewed the High Commissioner for Barbados, who said it was because there was a certain atmosphere of deference from people like Anthony, that generation, that they were ignored by the government. Do you accept that?
I'm not sure I would agree with that. Perhaps he knows, Bajans and other people from West Indies better than me. So I'm not necessarily saying that he's wrong to take that on board. I know very well from my own experience. My mother came from West Africa, during that period in the 1960s, and I know that there was a real desire to become, a fully integrated part of British society from a lot of migrants at that time, and I think it's unfortunate that now we're looking at a time when we didn't have digital records, where this whole thing was not well documented,
and that was not the fault. But that was not the fault of people like
not at all,
Anthony. So in that sense of saying sorry and apologising, can you guarantee here and now that Anthony will be reimbursed for that money that he had to put up to stop him being deported illegally?
Well, as I say, the government is going to look at every single individual that this has affected,
so including Anthony,
including Anthony, and we look at the individual circumstances, because each situation will be different.
But you're Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party. You are in a position of power. Would you like to see Anthony reimbursed?
I absolutely want to see the government make this right.
So you would like to see Anthony reimbursed for this?
Well, as I say, I personally cannot make that guarantee.
Well, you could. You are the Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party. You're sitting here opposite Anthony. You've said that it was a dreadful error, what happened to him and potentially to others. You could give him that guarantee and make it happen.
Well, I can't make it. I can't give a guarantee. I can't make it happen. However, the conversations I've had with Number 10, they've made it absolutely clear they want to do the right thing by people who have given their lives supporting the country, and that will be each individual. That will mean a slightly different thing.
Are you reassured by that, Anthony?
No, I don't even know. I don't even know. All I know that I'm happy with the progress that's happening, and I'm happy that most of the my black sisters and brothers, people start to recognise them, that they're not all legal, and you know, that part of it I'm kind of happy about.
He's happy and relieved, but Herman Ousley, what does it say about the culture of the Home Office, about the leadership of Theresa May when it comes to dealing with people from that Windrush generation?
Well, the interesting thing last week, what people were saying to us when we were saying to them, the Home Office is saying, if you have a problem, come and see us. And people say, well, that's a death sentence. If we go to the Home Office, they're going to detain us, and before we know it, we're on an aeroplane. There is a culture that has been created as a result of this environment of hostility that Theresa May herself created. People feel that they don't have to account to anyone. There's a presumption of guilt rather than establishing from the basis of innocence people's right to be here. And that's a process we're promised we're going to get now, but we should find, this is not new. These stories have been appearing in the newspapers for months. So the fact that this hasn't been brought to the attention of the Home Secretary until now is a totally ridiculous situation. And certainly if we're going to change the culture and build confidence and trust, a lot of work has to be done. And at the present time, I think people like Anthony are not going to be reassured by what's on the table.
Amber Rudd even mentioned the culture under in the Home Office, that it wasn't about the individual, it was too much about the processes. Was the culture at the Home Office too harsh under Theresa May's leadership?
No, I don't think it was. I don't think the Home Office was that at all. I think they have a job to do, and like any organisation, they focus very much on delivering that job. That's what we demand of all government departments. What the Home Secretary said is that whilst you're discharging the duty that we ask of the officials at the Home Office, we need all of us, at both political level and elsewhere, to always be conscious of the human impact of the actions we're taking. I think that was the point she was making.
How does the government make this right?
Well, I'm really disappointed that James hasn't offered on this programme to walk out of the studio with Anthony into the Home Office and personally take responsibility for ensuring that he gets his money back. And what I see the Tories doing is saying, no, 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 this wasn't a malicious policy, this was a filing error. What I want to hear the government do is apologise for the way that they've made Anthony and many people like him feel, because they've contributed to our society for decades, financially, socially, in every possible way. You've apologised for a filing error, not about how this makes him and people like him experiencing this feel and their place in society.
No, sorry, if that's how it came across...
Is that fair?
If that's how it came across, that's not what I meant.
Let him speak. Pardon?
The detention centres, them are packed, full.
And you sat here and told us that you went to the Home Office and you weren't believed.
They didn't believe me. They didn't even want to see me.
Final thought from you then, James Cleverly.
No, my apology was for the hurt, the pain, the uncertainty that Tony and the other Windrush generation felt. That's absolutely what the apology that I gave, and the apology that the Prime Minister's given.
All right.
Can't take that to the bank, though, can he?
Herman Ousley and Anthony, will you come back and tell us if that money is reimbursed to Anthony by the Home Office, by the government?
We're going to get it for him, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. James Cleverly, thank you very much for coming in.
Having refused a meeting with him up until yesterday morning on the subject, this morning the Prime Minister met and personally apologised to the leaders of 12 Caribbean countries for the treatment of the Windrush migrants who came to the UK from 1948 onwards. Theresa May says she was sorry for the anxiety that had been caused by many having their British citizenship questioned, some losing their jobs and benefits, some threatened with deportation. Our correspondent Adina Campbell reports.
That was the first day that he started school.
Paulette Wilson, another descendant of the Windrush generation, who arrived into the UK as a child from Jamaica. Despite living here for more than 50 years, she was held in a detention centre for not having the right paperwork.
When I saw the illegal paper, I just didn't understand it, and I kept it away from my daughter for about 2 weeks. I was just walking around in a day thinking, why am I illegal? It's just upsetting to think that an ordinary person like me could go through something like that. I'm still going through hell at the moment.
Arrivals at Tilbury. In Jamaica, they couldn't find work. Discouraged but full of hope, they sailed for Britain.
The treatment of long-term immigrants from Commonwealth countries now living in the UK has become the focus of international political debate. Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness today met his counterpart Theresa May to discuss the welfare of those affected. He reacted to the controversy in a speech to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London.
Prime Minister, we welcome your response and we look forward to a speedy implementation of your proposed solution.
Then came another, more intimate discussion at number 10 with other Commonwealth leaders. And inside, hoping to make amends, Theresa May apologised.
I want to dispel any impression that my government is in some sense clamping down on Commonwealth citizens, particularly those in the Caribbean who built a life here. I take this issue very seriously. The Home Secretary apologised to the House of Commons yesterday for any anxiety caused, and I want to apologise to you today.
After the meeting, some of those who'd attended gave their reaction.
It is regrettable that the circumstance which we now find ourselves was allowed to get to this far. But nonetheless, we want to consecrate the future, and we hope that these troubling issues that are impacting the migrant population would not surface again.
Jamaica's Prime Minister says he's poised to work with the British government.
It is a concerning matter, but we take note that the government has given a commitment, and we stand ready as Caribbean leaders to ensure that the commitment is kept.
Empire Windrush arrived into Tilbury Port in Essex back in 1948, carrying the first wave of immigrants from the Commonwealth. And in 1971, they were legally entitled to remain in the UK, but the Home Office did not keep records. Regulations were tightened in 2014 under the then Home Secretary Theresa May, and without proof of legal status, this restricted access to healthcare, housing and jobs. Ralston Knight came to the UK as a baby from the small Caribbean island Curacao. He spent most of his life living, working and raising his family in Leicester. But in 2010, he was denied from updating his passport and says this led to him being let go at work. Watching Theresa May's apology, he's trying to stay positive.
I think it's a genuine apology. Just got to take her at her word. But I just hope that the genuineness will be seen in the action of what happens after from now on. People getting the right to stay in Britain, whether that's by a passport, the right to work, so that this issue of immigration doesn't come up again.
Whether apologies are enough to draw a line under this ongoing issue, Caribbean leaders say they'll continue to fight for the rights of all those affected. Adina Campbell, BBC News.
Let's talk to our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, who's in Downing Street this evening. John, the last 24 hours have been deeply damaging for the government, and more stories keep emerging.
Yes, the stain of this scandal won't wash away quickly or easily. The Prime Minister was hosting at the Commonwealth Summit today, hoping to project Britain's openness and global reach and international friendships, and then across the road in the House of Commons defending the military action in Syria as an example of Britain acting as a force for good in the world. Now, all of that has been overshadowed by the way the Home Office, her old department, treated members of the Windrush generation. One of her favourite Tory-supporting newspapers called it a fiasco that shames Britain, and Mrs May has become very directly embroiled in the in the argument. We've seen ministers apologising in writing. We saw Theresa May apologising in person. The sight of the Prime Minister saying sorry to a room full of Caribbean leaders, insisting Britain was not clamping down on Commonwealth citizens, that was not simply politically embarrassing, it was in many ways uncomfortable to watch. And all of this may have made the Prime Minister's strategic mission of protecting and preserving Britain's influence and standing in the world may have become more difficult. A leading European is saying that Europeans now fear harsh treatment when they come to assert their rights of residence. Ministers will deny that, but opponents and critics of the government tonight agree that the government has suffered a loss, and maybe the country has too, in terms of moral authority.
John Pienaar, outside number 10, thank you.
The improbable juxtaposition of Commonwealth heads of government, 12 of them from the Caribbean, being in London the very day that this vast controversy erupted, has deepened the scale of the row. But how did we get here? Between 1948 and 1973, over 500,000 people from the Caribbean migrated to the United Kingdom at the invitation of the British government. After immigration rules changed in 1971, those who had already settled in the United Kingdom were automatically given indefinite leave to remain. But it's estimated that up to 50,000 Commonwealth-born people living then in the United Kingdom may not have registered to safeguard their right to live here. All of these long-standing Commonwealth residents were protected from enforced removal by a specific exemption in the 1999 Immigration and Asylum Act, a clause the government removed in 2014. And so, as a result of the then Home Secretary Theresa May's policies, an approach she described as creating a hostile environment for illegal immigrants, the government required landlords, the NHS, and other bodies to check people's immigration status. Suddenly, those members of the Windrush generation who hadn't applied for leave to remain faced being labelled as illegal immigrants and the real possibility of being deported. And that brings us to today. Simon Israel reports now on the latest developments.
Crunch time for the Prime Minister today, as Caribbean leaders turned up at number 10 in the wake of the Windrush immigration crisis. One apology from the Home Secretary yesterday was clearly not enough, and Theresa May couldn't have been more contrite.
I take this issue very seriously. The Home Secretary apologised to the House of Commons yesterday for any anxiety caused, and I want to apologise to you today because we are genuinely sorry for any anxiety that has been caused.
An apology is one thing, but the prospects of putting things right for many of those children who arrived in the 60s is another. Rupert Everett was one of them. He came in 1962, a teenager, and has lived, worked and retired in the UK. At one point, he was threatened with deportation after being advised to apply for a biometric card for proof of status.
They were threatening to send me to a detention place. What aircraft do you want to go on? When do you want to go? Do you want to go next week? We can arrange for you to go. And don't go and hide because we'll find you. So that make anybody feel.
Depression and anger took over, made worse by the fact the Home Office had copies of all the documents, he says, but still refused to accept his right to stay.
I wrote back to them and tell them I'm not illegal. I came to this country when Jamaica was a part of this country. So that means I'm entitled to be here.
Trevor Johnson was another young Jamaican boy when he arrived in the UK with his brother.
This is me, this is Trevor.
His passport, he says, had indefinite leave to remain. That disappeared, and when his benefits were stopped 4 years ago, his nightmare began.
It's like they wanted to get rid of me, you know, but I had to fight, and, you know, I got where I had to get to. And I'm not here illegally, you know what I mean? My parents was here, my mum was getting child benefit for me and my brother, you know. Left school, had a national insurance number. I've still got it till this day, you know. So.
But it's emerged that there are many Windrush documents that have not survived until this day. There are reports that thousands of landing cards, for example, which recorded immigrant arrivals, have been destroyed. But the Home Office says these are irrelevant in determining someone's immigration status. Lawyers and charities are demanding an independent commission of inquiry. But the government wants to focus on what exactly the proposed new task force is going to do. But there remain many unanswered questions around the scale of the problem, how will those affected be compensated, and if there have been deportations, what the Home Office is going to do to allow these people back.
Our political correspondent Michael Crick has been watching the day's events in Westminster. Michael.
Well, John, it's surprising, really, that government ministers didn't see this problem coming. I mean, Simon's been reporting on it for Channel 4 News for 3 months now, and Amelia Gentleman, the reporter on The Guardian who's covered it, is actually married to a government minister, Joe Johnson, brother of Boris Johnson, and it was entirely predictable that the issue would come to head this week when Commonwealth heads of government are meeting in London. In the last 48 hours, Theresa May and Amber Rudd have been trying to resolve the issue. Amber Rudd with her apology and attack on her own department yesterday. And today, Theresa May finally agreeing to meet Caribbean leaders.
We'll get what's fair. We'll get what's fair, said the Jamaican PM. It's not often you see so many prime ministers in number 10. Yet till yesterday, Caribbean leaders' requests for this meeting had been turned down.
What was the mood of the meeting?
I would say it was a sober one. The issues are significantly difficult for our people, and so we shared our concerns, our objection to the manner in which our people here are being treated.
Perhaps it was sympathy for a fellow leader, but the premiers didn't actually seem that angry or keen to attack their host.
Do you think Mrs May herself is to blame for what's gone wrong?
Well, you know, I can't answer that question. The truth is, and she has said, that there has been a policy change and that this was an unintended consequence. We as Caribbean leaders, we have to accept that in good faith.
What sort of numbers do you think may have suffered as a result of this?
Well, I asked again specific questions. We were not able to get that answer.
Scores? Hundreds? Thousands?
I would be guessing if I said what it was, but certainly it would be significant, I would suspect.
Did you make mistakes as Home Secretary, Prime Minister?
And now ministers, in contrast to last night, say it could be no one's actually been deported.
We've got no evidence so far of any case of somebody who has been deported who had a right to remain in the United Kingdom. What we're saying, the Home Secretary has instructed her officials to double-check their records to make sure that that is the case. Obviously, if there is a case that's brought to our attention, we'll want to take immediate action to put it right.
Well, within the rest of the European Union right now, there are big concerns that what we've seen here over the Windrush generation could be just a taste of a crisis that could occur over a much larger group of people, and that's the 3 million EU citizens who, under the proposed Brexit deal, will have the right to carry on living here, providing they register with the Home Office. And for months now, EU diplomats and EU representatives have been voicing concerns about whether the Home Office has got the staff and the resources and the organisation. And after the last few days, they'll be asking more than ever, is the Home Office up to such a mammoth registration job?
Michael Crick. Well, joining me in the studio is Satbir Singh, who is Chief Executive of the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. And we might as well pick up right there with the European citizens, 3 million of them living here. Is it your view, given your interaction with the Home Office, that the Home Office is able to deal with such an absolutely vast number of potential registrations?
Well, I think there are certainly concerns around it, and the last few days have made it very clear that the Home Office simply isn't fit for purpose. This is a government department that has suffered from many years of deliberate neglect because immigration policy writ large was simply drive the numbers down, whatever the cost. And in the process, the Home Office has had that hostile environment baked by the then Home Secretary, now, of course, Prime Minister, into every level of the bureaucracy. So there are real concerns about the credibility of any guarantees that are made to protect Europeans.
You've talked to Number 10 today. I mean, what is the sense you get? Has this hit home? Do they know how big this crisis is?
I'm not 100% certain that the Prime Minister has taken this issue seriously. We saw her statement commenting on the anxiety that she might have caused people. We're talking about people who've lost their jobs, lost their homes, people who are being denied cancer treatment. I'm not entirely sure she's taking this seriously. And
then there are the costs that people have entered in trying to get lawyers to sort them out and the rest. Hundreds of thousands of pounds. People have lost their homes.
Significant costs. People have hired lawyers, people have lost their jobs, people are paying thousands for healthcare treatment. And we have had a really startling admission from the immigration minister yesterday that people may have been removed, and the responsibility for this does go all the way to number 10. And so what we would call for, what many people even across Europe are calling for tonight, is an independent, impartial inquiry into the functioning of the Home Office, whether it's fit for purpose now or fit for purpose when it comes to dealing with Brexit.
As we speak now, is there a commitment to sort out what has happened to West Indians who've been, or ethnic West Indians who've been sent back? Are you sure that the government is now going to go the extra mile to get them back?
I think there's a commitment in principle to deal with this issue, but again, this is going to require a lot more than the announcement of a task force. The terms of that task force will need to be defined, resources will need to be allocated, and there does need to be a clear commitment from the government that people will not be penalised, and that going forward there will again be an independent inquiry that looks at the record of the longest-serving Home Secretary in modern times, Theresa May, and the sort of toxic legacy she's left behind for her successor, who yesterday in the Commons looked like a Home Secretary who's quite frankly tired of defending her predecessor.
Well, now, one of the things which is going on right at this moment is another government department, the Department of Health and the NHS, in a drive in the Caribbean to recruit nurses and health workers to come and replace any potential leavings under Brexit by Europeans. I mean, what message does it send them? Who's going to agree to do anything?
It sends a fairly disastrous message out, and we've seen, you know, a significant 90% plus decline in the number of applications to become nurses from various parts of the world. If you're sending out the message to the countries of the Commonwealth or wherever it is that we'd like your nurses, we'd like your natural resources, we'd like your investment, but we're not going to treat people very well when they're here, and in 50 years' time we might throw them out, that's a shocking signal to send to our allies and potential trading partners. And I wouldn't be surprised if the government has to go the extra mile to reassure those countries that those people will be safe if they come here and look after us when we're sick.
We've emphasised the West Indies just now, the Caribbean in particular. But are other countries in your viewfinder? Are you seeing other instances affecting people from other countries?
Well, in our work, we see people every day who are removed from the country without what we would consider to be due process. They come from all over the Commonwealth and all over the world, and these are mothers, grandmothers, children, brothers and sisters, people who've come here, who have very legitimate reasons for coming here, who were exposed to an incredibly brutal system that Theresa May left behind in the Home Office, and it's shocking.
Well, Satbir Singh from the Joint Council of Welfare Immigrants, as you are Chief Executive, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, John.
Now we're joined by Skype from Barbados by the first black cricketer to represent England, Roland Butcher, a Barbadian and a proud Barbadian. What do you make of this? I mean, is this the England you left, having played such wonderful cricket?
Well, this is a very unfortunate situation, and it really begs the question as to why something of this nature really should be such an issue and so important in 2018. To have 50,000 people affected by this policy change, I mean, you can have policy changes by all means, but I think the real problem here has been the way it has been dealt with. And I believe that had this situation been dealt on a more humane basis, we would not be having the furore that we're having in UK right now. Basically, the England now, I would hope it is still the same as when I was a boy growing up in England and when I played Test cricket for England.
Well, that raises a question. I mean, how comfortable would you feel playing for England now, given what's happened?
Well, I mean, I still would have remained very comfortable playing for England because you know, I lived in England for 37 years. I certainly, from a youngster, I wanted to be a cricketer and to realize my dream of becoming an international cricketer, albeit in a foreign land. But, you know, I felt very proud of that, and I still feel very proud of it now. But I just think that this current situation, you know, I don't think it's totally the fault of the authorities. Obviously, There are issues in relation to people not registering during the period of time, but that should not be held against anyone. There must be situations within England where you can find the records of people who have lived there for 30, 40 plus years, who have really contributed to the development of the country. They have worked, they have paid their taxes, they pay their national insurances. You must be able to find records to validate that these persons are
Well, the problem is, as we've heard, it seems that the Home Office here, back in 2010, it's reported that they destroyed most of the landing cards, which might have proved that many of the Windrush generation actually did, you know, land here and had a right to remain. But I'm just wondering, you know, what you feel the British have to do to put this right.
Well, I think really they have a moral obligation to put it right. The people of the Caribbean were invited to England some 70 years ago, and over that 70 years, I think they have contributed significantly to the development of the UK and have a right to be there. As I said, they were there as guests, they were not as illegal immigrants. They have made their homes, their families have made their homes, and I myself obviously made it my home. My kids are still in England, and it's very much their home.
Well, can I just ask you then, I mean, there you are in Barbados. Is it a big story there? What do Barbadians think about it? Is there a sense of despair, anger, or just, well, never mind, it'll sort itself out?
No, I think it's a big story, and it's gaining more momentum day by day. It's being discussed, and obviously most Barbadians would be affected because they would have family members who are in this situation in England. So obviously they're very interested. And the other thing is you're talking about people who've been in England for this length of time. They know nothing of Barbados, and Barbados know nothing of them. So it really would be an impossible situation. I'm just using Barbados because obviously the Caribbean itself is affected, but it would be the same in all the other islands if these persons were sent back to the respective islands to do what?
Well, Roland Howes, thank you. Roland Butcher, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. And, well, we all have fond memories of your cricket. So thanks indeed for playing the game tonight. Thanks.
Pleasure.
You know it's getting pretty serious when the Prime Minister makes a personal apology, with thousands of second-generation Windrush family members losing out on benefits, pensions, healthcare. It is certainly that. She got through the rather awkward task of saying sorry to Commonwealth leaders for changes to immigration rules that basically she herself brought in as Home Secretary, only for another problem to surface. Now the Home Office is under fire for destroying, as recently as 8 years ago, the very immigration landing cards that would have proved the Britishness of those who have found a lifetime of living and working here count for almost nothing.
Big problems usually bring big apologies, and the Prime Minister's personal involvement today reflected the scale of this crisis and the urgent need to reassure Commonwealth heads of state that this mess is being sorted.
I want to apologise to you today because we are genuinely sorry for any anxiety that has been caused.
But the Caribbean leaders left no clearer as to whether there had been any deportations under the new rules, although they were gracious about the Prime Minister's reassurance.
We accept the Prime Minister's apology, and I believe that the right thing is being done at this time.
Did you ask for compensation, people who've been unfairly affected?
That there be a restoration of their rights, which is a much broader matter.
Everyone is sorry, but that doesn't solve the problem. And tonight there's a new complication. The Home Office has admitted that it destroyed thousands of the original registration documents from half a century ago for data protection reasons. But critics say they were a vital source of information. And information's what's now needed to help establish how long someone's been living here. The 1971 Immigration Act gave people from the Commonwealth indefinite leave to stay in the UK. But in 2014, the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, changed the rules to create what she called a hostile environment for illegal immigrants. The tighter regulations meant anyone who couldn't prove their legal status lost access to healthcare, housing and jobs. Beverly Booth has been here for nearly 40 years. She came as a teenager from Jamaica in 1979 to join her parents and says she was given the right to stay here. But after the Home Office told her they can't find her records, she was threatened with deportation.
We are contacting you because the Home Office told you you no longer have the right to remain in the UK.
Since then, she was given temporary right to remain, but that's now run out too, and life's become very difficult. She fears both eviction and deportation.
I feel more than betrayed because we was invited here. We didn't come. Our parents was invited here to come here. And when they come here, they would expect better treatment. And now we're here and we've done what we have to do, build up the country. Like they want to say, we don't want you here.
The government says it's determined to look at all the cases swiftly and sensitively. Its critics say change can't come soon enough.
A monstrous injustice has been done by our publicly paid for bureaucracy, our elected representatives to some British people. And actually, that has to be unwound, and it has to be unwound not tomorrow, but tonight.
Despite today's reassurances, concerns remain that many who arrived here young in hope now face old age in despair. Penny Marshall, News at 10.
Let's shift to the pressure on the other leader then, and that is, of course, Theresa May herself. How much trouble is she in tonight, do you think?
Well, I mean, equally, a very bad few days for her. Now, she said sorry today. She therefore effectively took responsibility for the policy that has led to the terrible treatment of the children of these people who came to Britain from the former British Empire to rebuild this country. Now, it is the case that she is not responsible for the brutal implementation of the policy, but the fundamental cause of it was her own ideas, and then her current Home Secretary simply hasn't gripped the problem fast enough, given that for weeks we've known that these Windrush children are being treated in, as I say, this grotesquely unfair way. Now, I don't think it's the end of the line for the Prime Minister, even though she has said sorry, partly because I asked the Home Office how many people do they think have been affected among the Windrush generation. They simply didn't know. And there's a second point, which is really important. She has given a commitment that 3 million EU citizens will be allowed to stay here. The paperwork to guarantee them staying here has not even begun. And if they've messed up the problem for possibly a few tens of thousands of people who came here 30 or 40 years ago, goodness knows how much of a mess they will make of making sure that those EU citizens feel secure here.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed for that.
It's a backlash against a backlash. Some years ago, the government clamped down on immigration to appease those who thought we are a soft touch. And now the consequences of that populist measure have boomeranged back to thwack the government itself in the face. Today, Theresa May acknowledged the problem, apologising to Caribbean leaders who are in London for the Commonwealth Head of Government's meeting. It was an upgrade on the apology from the Home Secretary yesterday.
I want to reassure you that I take this issue very seriously. I will be ensuring that the Home Office is dealing with this as well and efficiently and as swiftly as they can, and giving people every support to ensure that we can give them the reassurance of knowing that they are here and we welcome them and we value the enormous contribution they've made to our country.
Well, today it emerged that in 2010, under Theresa May, the Home Office destroyed disembarkation cards dating back decades, a record of a person's arrival date that could be very helpful in determining whether they had arrived at a point when it was legal to settle here. Our political editor, Nick Watt, is with me. Fascinated, Nick. So the government have apologised all over the place for this. Do they recognise that the 2014 Act, the policy of a more hostile environment, was a mistake all those years ago? Is that what they're
Not quite. I do sense immense concern in Whitehall, hence that apology from the Prime Minister, but I don't sense a fall in support for what Theresa May was doing as Home Secretary. What I do sense is Whitehall bickering, a feeling that Number 10 initially refused that meeting that then took place today, and then a feeling that the Home Office have not handled this very well. to which defenders of the civil service say, well, excuse me, those officials were just implementing agreed government policy from Theresa May's times as Home Secretary. But I really have to say I'm not picking up amongst ministers and ministers who might be prepared to criticise the Prime Minister a feeling that she did make big mistakes as Home Secretary. There's a feeling that in those days immigration was high, there was a concern that there was a strain on public services, and you had to be very careful with it. What I did pick up from one minister who's sort of quite a leading figure on what you might describe as the sort of the one nation wing of the Tory is that perhaps there was too much emphasis on numbers, and if you focus on numbers then you end up with this talking about how this was a casualty of that approach. But this person did say to me that Theresa May did grab this issue very quickly this week.
Right, right. I mean, we also have to remember the period we're talking about when the more hostile policy towards illegal immigration came in. It was not a Conservative government, it was a coalition government.
Yes, obviously we're talking about 2 immigration acts, one in 2014 during the coalition, one in 2016 after the coalition. So that means that some of these measures would have been signed off by Nick Clegg, because of course he chaired the cabinet subcommittee that oversaw the work of the Home Office. Now, Polly Mackenzie, one of his senior advisors, was tweeting this afternoon saying that this whole hostile environment, that was a climate created by Theresa May. So this afternoon I spoke to Norman Baker, who was a Liberal Democrat minister in the Home Office, and this is what he had to say to me.
Well, I do regret that went through, but I have to say there are a lot of other things that we did stop. You know, this was a constant tank moving forward, a tank of shamelessness coming forward from the Tories week after week to try to deal with immigration as they saw it. And to be quite honest, you couldn't stop everything. We stopped quite a lot. You couldn't stop everything. The tank rolled on.
So real anger with the Liberal Democrats because, of course, the coalition is still defining them.
Nick, thanks very much. Now, if you want to clamp down on illegal immigrants, you'd better have some way of distinguishing the illegal immigrants from the legal ones. Half the problem here is that back in 1973, Britain gave a permanent right to reside here to Commonwealth immigrants who had already arrived. Just as exactly, by the way, as we now say we will to EU citizens after Brexit. But back then, we didn't keep a register of the names. This is not a problem, I think, that would arise in a country that has ID cards, but we are allergic to ID cards in this country. In fact, you could look at this whole case as an example of poor government record keeping. Let's take a few minutes now to hear what that has meant for one man, Junior Green, and his sister Doreen Green. James Clayton has been hearing the story.
Firstly, I was born in Jamaica. I was born in 1956. I came over with my mother when I was 15 months old. We arrived in England in, what day? January 58.
So you've been in the UK since 1958?
Virtually 60 years. Yeah, it's a long time. Yeah.
Do you have any childhood memories of Jamaica? Is it all...
No, I've got none whatsoever. I'm an Englishman. I mean, I've had all my education in this country. I've worked in this country. I've lived in this country. I'm an Englishman.
You've never left the country?
I've never left the country. 60 years.
In 1993, Junior received a letter with a Home Office stamp saying that he could now remain indefinitely in the United Kingdom. But when he tried to get this certified on his Jamaican passport in 2009, the Home Office asked in each of the previous 10 years to prove that he'd lived in the UK.
Then putting the onus on
himself,
Junior,
or anybody,
to go, or anyone, to go back 10 years.
Yes.
Who keeps, you know, records for 10 years? You know, you wouldn't think that you'd need to, because you know you've grown up all your life in this country.
Junior says that twice his application to update his passport with the correct visa information was rejected. In March last year, Junior and Doreen's mother was taken ill in Jamaica.
Very bad, actually. And if I didn't see her, I probably wouldn't, if I didn't go, I probably wouldn't see her alive again. So that's a choice I had to make. And my mum wins. So I went. Ideally, like I said, I had all evidence showing that I lived in the country and I was visiting the country, so I thought it would be no problem.
Their mum, Joyce, passed away in June, with Junior by her side. But when they got to the airport to return to the UK, there was a problem. Junior wasn't allowed onto the flight.
I was upset. I was virtually in tears, being quite honest, because And it weren't for my sister consoling me, I don't know what happened. But I couldn't understand why, you know, why?
Junior was stuck in a country alien to him. He applied for a returning visa, but the weeks turned into months. His mother's body was repatriated back to the UK, but he missed her funeral.
For him, being left there by himself, no immediate family, I could just imagine what he was going through, you know. Must have been very, very hard for him. But we spoke every day, and we kept trying to keep him upbeat, because you hear rumours that, you know, this returnee resident thing can take up to 6 months. So he thought, I could be here for 6 months, you know. It was hard. And I think it's hard for the whole family, because I think, you know, when we tried to explain to the family why he wasn't there, they couldn't believe it. You know, they just couldn't believe it. But as I said, we tried to keep him, you know, make him feel like he was part of it, like he was there, and his kids, you know, made sure that, you know, he took lots of pictures and stuff like that, you know, so.
In September, his local MP, Toby Perkins, contacted the Home Office on Junior's behalf, and he got his visa to return to the UK later that month.
It was an inhumane situation, and I know so many of my constituents were just disgusted on Junior and his family's behalf.
The stress that this has caused the Green family is very clear, and Junior says that he's had to leave his job because of the emotional and mental strain.
What people want is something that assurances that they can stay. This is their home. This is where they've lived for all these years, you know, and we want to make it official, because we've done our part. We've helped England, you know, get to where they are now, right? So it's time for England to help us now. And the Home Secretary, she needs to get on with it, because there's too many people out there who are just waiting for a knock on the door, or who was waiting for a knock on the door, to tell them that, you know, even though you've been here 60 odd years, you've got to go back to a country that you don't even know.
Well, James Clayton reporting on one case there. Joining me now is the Foreign Minister of St Kitts and Nevis, Mark Brantley. Very good evening to you.
Thank you.
You heard the apology from the Prime Minister today. Does that close the matter, do you think?
I don't think it closes it. I think what it does, it opens the dialogue now. The apology is welcomed, and I think it was well received in our region. But I think at the end of the day, there are other issues. What is the process now to deal with these?
What are the I mean, okay, they're going to try and expedite it. They put in a task force. Is that enough, or is there? Well,
there are other issues, as this reporting that we've just seen here, the Green family. How do you compensate people for what they've endured? How do you deal with the very real trauma that families have had? You know, this debate has been talked about as if it's a part of an immigration debate. But remember, when the Windrush generation came here, they were not immigrants properly construed. They were coming as British subjects. They were coming from British colonies. We were all part of the British Empire when they came. And we would have come 40, 50 years ago to help to rebuild this country after World War II. And so I entirely agree that the contribution has been made by Caribbean-born British nationals, and it is now time for the UK government to do the right thing.
To treat them in a responsible way. Tell me this, as we watch that film, do you think if the Greens had been white, they would have had to endure that experience?
It's difficult to say. I don't know that this revolves around an issue of race. I think it is rather revolving around an issue of misplaced, perhaps misguided policy, or perhaps unintended consequences of this policy. I felt, as I sat in number 10 today with my Prime Minister and with other Prime Ministers around the region, from the Caribbean region, I felt that your Prime Minister here, Theresa May, is perhaps best placed to deal with this fiasco, because clearly she was Home Secretary when many of the rules went into effect that now are having these disastrous consequences for so many people.
Some people are saying, as Home Secretary, she was pandering to populist opinion, being seen to be doing something about an issue of concern and didn't think it through. Would that be your take on what happened here, or are you more sympathetic to what the government was trying to do in the 2010s?
Well, I think as a politician myself, we understand that we try our best to frame policy. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always work as we intend it to work. I think I'm prepared to give the Prime Minister the benefit of her statements, to take her at her word, and to ensure, and we in the Caribbean intend through our High Commissioners here, to continue to push for this so-called Windrush generation to be treated fairly, to be treated properly, and to be given their rightful place here in the United Kingdom.
Because there's the other stage of this, is that this has been talked about for a while. When did you first become aware of it? When did your team start saying, hang on, something's going on here? We've got people who are not really
based on
meant
the
to be.
briefings that we've had, this issue has been sort of knocking about for more than 2 years.
Yeah.
So
they were told, and they basically just thought, well, why, yeah, what?
Well, the truth is, I think, and this is one of the great and the tremendous value, I think, of the media, because I think the media here played a critical role in making this issue topical. It has come now on the eve of Shogam, our Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and so it's a major distraction, if you will, that this sort of dirty laundry, if you will, is being aired at this particular time. So I think the time and the role of the media have been critical.
But what do you think of the immigration debate in Britain now? I mean, we're meant to be projecting ourselves as a post-Brexit global nation, very not retreating from the world at all.
I think immigration, not only here in the United States and the rest of Europe, has become a very topical issue. Indeed, it's an issue even in the Caribbean, as we have intra-regional travel. What I will say is that countries clearly have the right to determine who they let in and who they don't let in. This particular generation of people, I think, are the exception, because, as I said, they would have come when they were British nationals. But I think that the way that the British government deals with the Windrush generation might have implications post-Brexit, in terms of how Europeans living in England are to be treated, and vice versa, how people from England and living in Europe are to be treated as well.
Foreign Minister, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks. We did ask the government to come on the programme to talk about the treatment of the Windrush generation this evening, but they said nobody was available.
And we're joined tonight by Tom Newton-Dunn, political editor of The Sun, and the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. Welcome to you
Good evening.
both. We're starting off with Windrush, which is everywhere. I'm sure not many people knew exactly what the Windrush was before this week, but it's certainly kicking up a storm now, with the Prime Minister actually apologising to the heads of Commonwealth governments in London this week.
Yeah, so this is day 3 now of the Windrush Scandal. The Windrush, of course, was the famous boat that came over in the 50s. It will now be associated forevermore as the scandal that still could bring down a Home Secretary, because I think Amber Rudd...
Do you think it could?
I think we'll need a few more revelations. I think we're now into the could territory. Far from likely.
Which Home Secretary is the question?
Well,
very
Theresa May
true.
had to apologise today because, really to clear up Amber Rudd's mess, a staggeringly slow-footed response by the Home Secretary to the accusations that have been coming for 72 hours now, of the Home Office being appallingly insensitive in terms of responding to thousands of people's concerns that they don't have the documentation to prove that they have a legal right to be here for decades and may be evicted from their homeland because of it. Now, unfortunately, the problems began way back in 2010 when The Guardian reports tonight, as do several other papers, mine included, Theresa May, as one of her first acts as Home Secretary, decided it'd be a jolly good idea to remove all documentation, all very, very ageing, it must be said, landing cards from people who arrived in the 50s and 60s from the Caribbean that proved, and quite frankly, it's the only proof of their legitimate arrival into the country. All this stuff was incinerated when one Home Office warehouse was closed down and another was opened up. So we have this revelation today, this evening, putting this squarely, not just on the current Home Secretary's back, but as Susie rightly says, the former Home Secretary's back, who is now, of course, the Prime Minister.
But there has been some defence of this destroying of the landing cards, though, hasn't there?
Well,
tried to
Arguably,
justify.
keeping paperwork from 40-odd years ago is something that not every government organisation can do. Of course, you have to consolidate and shred and all the rest of it and digitise. Don't appear to have digitised it, having shredded it, which is the problem. But the issue with this is also not just that in the last 72 hours, as Tom says, that there's been this fire lit under the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, and this scandal has really taken off. It began when there was first a group put together by the Home Office under Theresa May in 2012 saying, I want to have a hostile environment for illegal immigrants in this country. I want to ensure that everyone must have paperwork. And she didn't seem to stop. And the civil servants who worked on that thing didn't appear to get the message through to her that there are lots of people who have very good reasons for not having paperwork. And you have to have some kind of either an amnesty or a way of allowing for that. It pushed through. 2015, they were starting to deport people, and refugee and migrant charities were starting to argue about this. Local media went on about it. There was a woman who was almost deported at the end of last year, whose story got into the local media and was getting some attention. But it only really caused the Prime Minister, who a month ago was telling a man with prostate cancer who was told he had to pay £54,000 to fund it himself, despite living in this country for half a century. Like a month ago, she was telling him he had to find the evidence. It was no problem of hers. Today, she's had to go around to the Commonwealth heads of government that she refused to see a few days ago and apologise to them in person, only because the Tory papers have actually come out against her. They've called it a fiasco today. It's not a fiasco, it's a disgrace. And it's a disgrace that it takes that. I mean, well done for the Power of the Sun and the Mail for getting her to this point, but it's a disgrace that that's what it takes for the Prime Minister to accept responsibility for what happened on her watch.
The Financial Times, their front page, May says, sorry for Windrush intimidation. And it's quite something, really, for the Prime Minister to actually come out and apologise to these heads of government who she didn't initially even want to meet.
Well, exactly. And here we have the precise trigger that really got this scandal to explode, because Amelia Gentleman, brilliant reporter on The Guardian, who it also must be said is the wife of a current government minister, Jo Johnson, the former universities minister, now the Rose Minister, a further embarrassment, will be a far smaller one for the government. She's been reporting this stuff for weeks and saying, what about the Windrush lot? I mean, they are facing serious problems here. They're getting investigated. Some of them are getting locked up in detention centres. No one paid a blind bit of attention, including my paper and everyone else's paper, apart from The Guardian. But the trigger for all this is, of course, the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit, which begins proper tomorrow. The Caribbean leaders were here yesterday. The big beasts like Prime Minister Modi of India, Trudeau of Canada arrive tomorrow. And the utterly asinine decision it wasn't Downing Street, it was, I think, someone in the Home Office to say, no, you 12 Caribbean leaders who care passionately about these families and their situation, you won't be able to see the Prime Minister and talk to her about that. The sheer political stupidity of realising that could seriously upset this grand summit, which is, by the way, the Queen's farewell to the Commonwealth, which has been in the planning for years, to not see that tank mine coming, I think, was real political ineptitude by a combination of Downing Street and the Home Office.
But do you think she's done enough to turn it round? She said sorry, she's met with them.
She should be declaring an amnesty for everyone who is a Windrush migrant and just saying, that's it, you'll get passports. You know, whatever, that's it. It's sorted, it's solved, it's fixed, it's on my desk, I'm going to fix it. It was my responsibility. I screwed it up. I was head of the department that screwed it up in the first place. This is on my watch. And the trouble is, you know, Amelia was reporting on some of this stuff at the end of last year. And every time local media or anybody else, refugee charities were talking about this, it was going into a press office. A press officer was reporting to their boss, who was reporting to the head of the department, that there were phone calls coming in for months and months and months. And as Tom says, it's only just because the Commonwealth heads of government there, and suddenly people are turning the fire on Theresa May that something gets done.
Yeah,
and
it didn't happen overnight, did it?